Hi, it's Jessica Fritz Aguiar. Welcome to Walk Softly Children, a Clovercrest Media Group podcast. As you all know, I've been doing everything and anything to try to get this case more attention. So recently, I was interviewed about Doreen's case on WICC 600am in Milford, Connecticut. That's home to Mark Vincent and his church, Milford Christian. The service area hits many points relevant to Doreen's story: Milford and Bridgeport, where she spent a lot of time with her dad, as well as Waterbury, where Doreen sometimes lived with her mom, Donna. I had a chance to speak to the fill-in host on the afternoon show, who just happens to be the producer of this podcast, and my husband, Joe Aguiar. Have a listen as we provide an overview of Doreen's case and share its status today, as well as our next steps.
I am Joe Aguiar. My next guest is an attorney and the host of the podcast Walk Softly Children. She's also my wife, Jessica Fritz Aguiar. Welcome back to WICC.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. Now, I had you on at some point last year to tell this story. It was the one time. So if you could just briefly, this podcast, you're in your third season. You have been following a missing person case that came about in Wallingford, Connecticut in 1988. The man who is the prime suspect in this case has been living in Milford for most, I think, the last 30 years or so. Arrested last year on a gun charge, and things are now unfolding here. Just give a brief synopsis of what your podcast is about.
Okay, so this little girl, Doreen Vincent, was 12 years old, living in Bridgeport, kind of back and forth between her mother, her father, her grandmother, living a bit of a tumultuous life. And her father brought her to Wallingford without telling anybody and brought her to a farmhouse he had rented at the beginning of June 1988. And then about a week later, she went missing. Now, his story, Mark's story about when his daughter Doreen went missing, is that they got into a fight. He had previously burned Doreen's diary and her scrapbook in the driveway of the home. He was known to be obsessive about her. He had quite a temper, and he admitted to the police later that he had gotten into a fight with her and pushed her into a window, and she backed up and broke it in the home. There had also been an event, the timing is unclear, but during that week she was living there, that Mark was paddling her in her room so loudly that he told his wife to take her children outside because the screaming was too much and they couldn't take it. So Doreen disappeared. Accounts differ. I believe it was June 12th, 1988. She was missing for 3 days before anybody but Mark and his wife Sharon knew that she was missing. Mark had instructed his wife Sharon, Doreen's stepmother, to not answer the phone, not tell anyone, including Doreen's mother Donna, where she was or that she was missing. He actually dismantled the phone from the wall, the landline, 1988 landline from the wall, and he told no one. When Donna came to pick her daughter up that weekend for visitation, Mark said she had been gone for 3 days. He insisted that she had been with Donna, which obviously was not the case. Her bedroom was stripped. The comforter was off the bed and missing. Mark and Sharon told Donna that they'd thrown it away because Doreen had messed it up. And Donna insisted that they call the police. The Wallingford police did come out to the house, and they bought Mark's story, which was that she was a runaway, that he knew she'd be back. He didn't know where she was. He'd gone out looking for her, but he couldn't find her, and she would be back. Her mother, Donna, knew something was awry, obviously, and tried to tell the police, that wasn't the case. She was in fear for her daughter's safety. And she also told the police something about Mark, that he had sexually abused her two younger sisters, Donna's two younger sisters, when they were 11 and 12.
Which was exactly the age Doreen was when
exactly.
this all went
and
down.
Donna was a very young mother. Donna got pregnant with Doreen when she was 15 years old and married Mark shortly after she turned 16, and then Doreen was born shortly thereafter. But Donna's two younger sisters were 11 and 12 when Doreen was born, and their story has been consistent over the past 35 years that they were being raped and sexually abused by Mark Vincent.
Now, let's talk about, Jessica, where this story went wrong, because the newspapers, all the newspaper reports that went out about this case, all directly quote the prime suspect in her disappearance, and they treat his word as gospel, to the point where when we talk to the Wallingford police, they still kind of see things through Mark's eyes from that day, and you know, again, forgetting that he's the prime suspect and most likely was lying about everything that he said.
Yeah, I mean, in digging down into all of these details about the case, the date has been established in the media based on Mark's word that she disappeared on a Wednesday, June 15th. But as you know, Joe, we've been talking about this case for almost 5 years now. I mean, we've really dug down to the fact that it was June 12th. So instead of just being missing for 3 days, we think it was more like 6. You know, a couple other things, you know, where Mark says he last saw her in the house, and then he went out to his wood shop outside, came back in, and he said Doreen was missing. She'd gone out the front door. His wife later told the police that was impossible because the front door of this old farmhouse had a deadbolt that you could only unlock from the inside with a key, and Doreen did not have that. So that would have been impossible. You know, so for Mark to say this is where she was last seen, this is what she was wearing, you know, all of those are just through his words. And it's not trustworthy, but it's been really hard to get the police to come around to the more likely version of events, because they are still stuck, as the Record Journal in Meriden and Wallingford has been stuck on recounting those details as Mark told them.
Right. Yeah, it's funny. At one point, I was interviewed by the Record Journal, and I explained to the Record Journal, like, you guys keep republishing old stories that you wrote incorrectly 30 years ago, citing the murderer at like his word is gold. Stop doing that. And instead, they ran it with an article that they did about you, but they ran that article as like the front page news, republishing again all the old nonsense.
Yeah, and you know, that article was from 1990, which was already, I believe, a year and a half after she had gone missing. One of the biggest pieces of misinformation was that she left with a denim jacket on. Now, Doreen had this denim jacket that she was in love with. It was 1988. It was acid washed. And, you know, they constantly say, and this is even on the Charlie Project, which is a prime site for information about missing children, that Doreen was last seen wearing this denim jacket. Now, that's just not true. I've actually touched and seen the denim jacket because it's with her mother now. Now, that denim jacket was hanging in the closet of Doreen's room, as were multiple items that Mark said her father said that she had gone missing with. All of that was in the closet. It was her purple Reeboks. She had a tape deck that she had. And had the police just gone into Doreen's room and looked, they would have noticed that all of those items that he said she went missing in and with were still at the house.
Yeah, this was some really sloppy police work here. In the aftermath of all this, too, then, while everyone's out looking for Doreen, Mark is doing quite the opposite and then flees the state for some time.
Yes, the police didn't have an eye on him for quite some time, and in the paper, that's just reported as Mark moved addresses. He was in Connecticut. The police couldn't find him. And I have spoken extensively to his family, including his brother Brad, out in California. Now, Mark has 4 siblings, and they all hate his guts, and they all think that he had something to do with Doreen's disappearance. But Mark just showed up in the fall of 1988 at his brother's house and got kicked out shortly thereafter. As for looking for Doreen, you know, what Mark was really doing was tooling around the state. We have his phone records. making random calls back and forth, and visiting with people that he didn't tell Doreen was missing, including his own mother, who he visited on Father's Day. Now, his mother, Doreen's grandmother, was already aware that Doreen had gone missing because Donna, Doreen's mother, had called her mother-in-law or her ex-mother-in-law, pleading, do you know where Doreen is? Have you seen her? So when Mark showed up on that Sunday, on Father's Day, Lori, Mark's mother, was well aware that Doreen was already missing, and she didn't say anything to her son, but she tried to bait him, tried to get him to talk to her about Doreen. She gave him peas from her garden. She said, these are Doreen's favorite. Bring them to her for me. And Mark said, okay. And she said he was in the garden helping her garden, and he didn't have a care in the world, and he didn't mention his daughter one time. So as far as looking for her, he was with his mother. He was with a family friend. Again, didn't mention that his daughter was missing. So there was no sense of urgency.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, it's troublesome that he took the phone off the wall, because if she was missing,
how could she call?
He decide to call home?
Right. We are we are live with my wife, Jessica Fritz Aguiar, host of the podcast Walk Softly Children. You can find it on iTunes, Google, Amazon, pretty much it is on every single podcast platform. Jessica, thank you for being here. Let's pick up the story from Mark eventually. So we people should understand, too, Mark is a career-long criminal. And he had gotten in trouble in the late 70s for burning a disco down in New York. And so
I forgot about the disco, yes.
Yeah, there's so much you could forget about this story, but it's only relevant in that he was a convicted felon and therefore ineligible to own a gun. That's right.
That's right. And so when he was the police eventually in the spring and summer of 1989, new cops came in and they decided, wait, there's something fishy about this story. It doesn't add up. And Doreen still hasn't been found, right? It's not like she's turned up, at the pizza parlor or a gas station somewhere. So they started asking questions, and it turned out that Mark had made his wife, Sharon, go purchase him a gun in Meriden, Connecticut. Now, again, he wasn't allowed to have one as a felon. He made her go buy one, and he had it on him. She tried to return it to the shop where she'd purchased it. And again, with the temper, he got mad at her, made her go back and get the gun. And when he was eventually found, they conducted a search warrant of his mother's house, and the gun was there. Funnily enough, he was found, Joe, when his new girlfriend called up because he was burning her clothes in a fire pit in Wallingford. So this guy's a firebug. He burned the scrapbook and the diary. He was burning his wife's or his girlfriend's clothes. But that's eventually how they found him when he was back in Connecticut. So he was prosecuted for that, the unlawful possession of the gun, in 1991, and I believe sentenced to 4 years, served 2. And then after that, he was just back out on the street.
So fast forward to 2003 is the next development in this case. Mark is apparently addicted to drugs, dope sick, and is looking to cut a deal with Wallingford. He says he has some information about Doreen. He and his lawyer and the prosecutors and the police, they never end up getting on the same page. He wanted full immunity. They said no, and so that doesn't happen.
Yeah, and this has been one of those weird stories, right? There are so many weird aspects to this case. The police told me he tried to broker the deal in 2003. He said, look, I want full immunity. I don't think he said, I'll tell you where Doreen is or I'll tell you what I did to Doreen. He said, I'll impart information relevant to the disappearance of my daughter, which is a different thing, right?
And a weird thing to say about your daughter.
A weird thing to say about your daughter sort of suggests that perhaps someone else might be involved, which, we have not ruled out. But somehow, the prosecutor wised up or changed his mind, and it turned. They were like, we're not going to offer this guy full immunity for anything. His 12-year-old daughter is still missing. And, the police gave me that bit of information. They said, we want to see what you do with this piece of information. And I said, okay, give me the records. Where's any write-up, any notes about this meeting? Can I talk to the prosecutor? And they said, no, it was never written down. It was never recorded. The prosecutor that was in charge of that decision has retired, and you can't speak to him. And it was just sort of lost in the wind.
Which is so ridiculous. And then, so from 2003, fast forward to you. In 2019, there really hadn't been anything happening on this case. Mark was now involved in a Christian-based rehab program, kind of living the good life.
That's right. It's called Teen Challenge, and it's a franchise across the country. I think, Joe, when you and I first heard that title, we were very nervous that Mark was working with teenagers. But
right.
This particular organization in New Haven and Teen Challenge of New England was for adult men only, and it's a Christian recovery addiction group. He had been there with his best friend, apparently, this man called Pastor Rick Welch. They came up together in the organization. They graduated together, and Mark had been living there for quite a while and was doing custodial work for the organization and some contracting work through them as well. But as soon as this podcast took off, I got calls from the guys at Teen Challenge left and right, wanting to be anonymous, but telling me, this guy's terrible, this guy's abusive, he flips out, he speeds on the highway, he's thrown guys out of moving vehicles. I mean, he's basically a menace to society.
Also, to refute the accusations that have been leveled against him as the prime suspect in his daughter Doreen's disappearance, he tried to convince the members of Teen Challenge that that's not true because he has another daughter, and he tried to present that as evidence that he hadn't killed his daughter.
That's right. So he had two children. Their names are Paul and Sarah. They were 3 and 2 at the time of Doreen's disappearance. They were actually in the house at the time of Doreen's disappearance, which is funny because when Mark tells this story about, going out and he was out for he doesn't know how long and Doreen went missing, we're talking an extremely rural area of Wallingford. If anybody's been up to Gouveia Vineyards, the Gouveia Vineyards was not there at the time. It's just a big, sprawling expanse of farmland. I don't even know if there are lights up there. Joe, you and I were going to try to do the walk from the farmhouse to the center of town to see how long it would take. And in the dark, there's no, what do they call them? I guess, sides of the road.
Sidewalks, right. There's no sidewalks or walkways. It's right. And again, basically what we have figured out is, and there is zero evidence that the second she walked off that property, there's no evidence to suggest that happened at all. She's never been seen off of that property.
Right.
So it's likely she died right there in that farmhouse on Whirlwind Hill Road in Wallingford. Now, you turn up the heat on Mark. The Teen Challenge people are turning against him. He flees to their other campus in New Hampshire. You alert the Wallingford police. I'm sorry, Vermont. I confuse Vermont and New Hampshire.
I know.
It's the same state to me.
I do want to go back to the point that you made because I think it's important. So his daughter, Sarah, who was 2 at the time Doreen was missing, it's actually very sad because this woman now, does not remember anything about her sister, as her brother Paul does have memories. And so it makes her sad, right? Because she doesn't remember her sister at all. But she did come to visit Mark at Teen Challenge once. The podcast was ongoing. Mark knew that there was suspicion around the campus about Doreen having disappeared into thin air. And he told the men there, my daughter's coming to see me today. I know that you've heard that my daughter went missing, but that's not true because she's coming to see me today. And yet it was Sarah and not Doreen, who would have been substantially older and obviously alive, right, who was coming. But that was just not the case.
That's another odd thing for a father to do, obviously.
Well, what about, Joe, when you and I called him, or you called him, I should say, in the very beginning of this project, and you had a chat with Mark, and what did he say to you?
He said he didn't want to go over it. He'd been over this over and over again, and that he would see his daughter in glory.
And I didn't catch that when he said it, but you...
I sure did. I said, what do you mean? Is she dead? Do you think she's dead? And he got very upset. And then I mentioned pedophile rings, and he suddenly calmed down, and he blamed it all on a pedophile ring.
Right, which is a different story.
A much different story than any other story he's told. Yeah, he's a storyteller, this guy. So he's up at their Vermont campus. He's scared for his life. He thinks the cops are honing in because of your work here. So he ends up stealing a gun, which is a big no-no, and he makes his way to Milford, Connecticut.
Well, let's talk about who he stole the gun from really quickly.
Well, his son, of course.
Right. So, Paul Vincent, Doreen's brother, was talking to me for a bit. He was very anti his father. He told me he was convinced his father had done it. He supported my work. And then shortly after that, he was at Teen Challenge with his father in New Haven. And I said, Paul, that worries me. Take care of yourself. And he said, I'm too woke to be brainwashed.
Yeah, this kid's a genius, too. Takes right after the old man. Listen, I got about a minute and a half, we do need to fast forward to kind of where the story is now, because he does get arrested in February in Milford, spent some time in jail, and the Wallingford police felt like he was going to be there for a long time. They're like, Jess, great job. He's not going anywhere. They felt good about things. He's out.
He is. It was just a retread of what happened when he made Paul's mother, Sharon, purchase him a gun, in 1988. He got caught with his son's stolen gun. His son's actually the one who dropped the dime on him. He got arrested in the parking lot of Milford Christian Church, which is run by another best friend of his, Pastor James Loomer, and that has led down a whole other rabbit hole. There's a rat's nest of abuse going on over there. Pastor Loomer and his acolytes, I guess you would say, turning their heads to a great deal of abuse of children. And word is Mark confessed to multiple people at the church, including the pastor, and they decided the church wasn't going to do anything about it, and they were going to sit on it.
Yeah. So give us the latest here. He's out, or he's about to get released to a halfway house? And
no, he's at a halfway house. So he became eligible for parole. They decided this guy somehow was a great candidate for parole. They were supposed to let him out at the end of July. And then they just took another look, and they said, no, actually, he's such a great candidate for parole. We're going to let him out. And he got out, I think, on the 18th. And now he's at a halfway house in Bridgeport.
And you're not going to give up on this case. What have you got planned while Mark is out to continue this case and to draw attention to Doreen's disappearance?
Oh, I've got billboards. So if you go to GoFundMe, it's called Billboards for Doreen. It's under my name, Jessica Fritz Aguiar. You can donate. We need about $8,000 for 2 billboards, one in New Haven near Milford and one in Bridgeport near where Mark's daughter grew up and where he currently resides. My hope is that, someone does know something. I mean, he couldn't have kept his mouth shut for this long. And I want to put pressure on not only him, but anybody that he might have spilled his guts to. Somebody knows something about the case.
Those billboards will be going up at the beginning of June in the Bridgeport, Milford, Wallingford areas. Look for them again. You can visit clovercrestmedia.com/Walk Softly Children. Learn more about the podcast, which, again, as I said, is available on all of the podcast platforms. Walk Softly Children, the story of Doreen Vincent, who went missing from Wallingford, Connecticut, in 1988. Jessica, keep up that great work, and I know you're about halfway up to get that $8,000 to get these billboards going, so kudos to you and to your supporters for pushing the fight for justice for Doreen.
Thanks. And if we raise more money, it's going to go to RAIN, the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network. The billboards will be going up on June 12th, which is the 35th anniversary of her disappearance.
Jessica Fritz Aguiar, host of the podcast Walk Softly Children. Thank you, and I'll see you in about an hour.
I love you.
I love you
Bye.
too. Have a great day.
Walk softly, children. Walk softly, children. Walk softly, children. Find your freedom, little children.